Hello and welcome back to the channel NPA Discovery, where stories aren't just told, they're brought to life. Today, we're diving into the unforgettable legacy of Gilbert Gottfried, a man whose voice was impossible to ignore, and whose humor was even harder to tame. Whether you adored him or flinched at his boundary-breaking jokes, one thing's for sure, Gilbert Gottfried never played it safe. But did that fearlessness cost him everything? Or was it the very fuel that powered his career? Before we start, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep exploring the extraordinary stories behind iconic figures. Your support helps us bring these incredible journeys to screens around the world. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1955, Gilbert Gottfried was raised in a modest Jewish family, surrounded by the unfiltered energy of the city. While his upbringing was relatively ordinary, the creative spark ignited early. His older sister Arlene had a distinct eye for the unusual. She became a celebrated photographer who captured offbeat and poignant moments. That same artistic spirit flowed through Gilbert, but instead of lenses, he wielded laughter. By the time he was 15, Gottfried was already chasing the mic, performing stand-up in New York's clubs. He wasn't flashy or polished, but there was a rawness, a chaotic kind of brilliance. While others rehearsed punchlines, he dared to bomb, to experiment, to cross lines others wouldn't even approach. At first, he leaned on impressions, becoming a sort of comedian's comedian. But deep inside, he yearned to carve out a voice that was unmistakably his, and eventually, he did, in more ways than one. Let's pause here. Imagine being in a smoky Manhattan club, the crowd indifferent, maybe even hostile. And there's a teenager, nervously gripping the microphone, telling jokes in a squawky, high-pitched voice. Some laugh. Some boo. But Gilbert never wavered. That defiant confidence became the hallmark of his career. He wasn't aiming to please everyone. He was aiming to be heard. In 1980, fate handed him what seemed like a dream, a spot on Saturday Night Live. The show was undergoing a major cast overhaul, and Gottfried was part of the new blood. But SNL wasn't ready for him, and maybe he wasn't ready for them either. His eccentric style clashed with the writer's traditional format. They gave him straight-laced roles, stripping away the very eccentricities that made him special. The audience never saw the real Gilbert, and the show never gave him a chance to shine. And then there's the story, told by Gottfried himself, about the writers hating him so much they cast him as a literal corpse in a sketch. Was it a joke? Was it a jab? Probably both. But it marked the beginning of an industry-wide pattern. Gilbert Gottfried, the unpredictable firecracker, was either revered or rejected. He didn't last long at SNL. In fact, he claimed he learned about his dismissal from a fan letter before hearing it from the show itself. Brutal. But that setback didn't break him. Because, unlike many comics, Gottfried understood the game. Fame was fickle, and the only way to win was to keep moving, and move he did. MTV picked him up for a series of offbeat promos, finally letting him be himself. That's where the industry began to see the real Gilbert. One of those eyes belonged to Bill Cosby, who hired him for The Cosby Show in a recurring role. That opened doors, and soon, Gottfried was everywhere, guest starring on TV, appearing in movies, and eventually stepping behind the mic as a voice actor. But Gilbert wasn't just voicing cartoon characters. He was voicing an entire era of boundary-pushing comedy. He made you laugh, cringe, and think, sometimes all in the same breath. And as we continue this story, we'll see just how much that courage and recklessness defined both his triumphs and tragedies. Gilbert Gottfried's path in life was anything but traditional. And ironically, despite being one of the most unpredictable comedians in showbiz, his most consistent trait was that very unpredictability. You never knew what you were going to get, and that was exactly the point. In the 2000s and 2010s, Gilbert found a new rhythm. After decades of controversy, firings, and comebacks, he had learned to navigate the entertainment industry on his own terms. He continued to work steadily, even landing voice roles in hit shows like Family Guy, Law & Order, SVU, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was almost surreal. Here was the same man who got fired from MTV, dropped by Affleck, and booed at a roast, now appearing in family-friendly content. And here's where Gilbert's genius really stands out. He wasn't trying to conform. He wasn't cleaning up his act to fit into the mold. He was simply being himself in different environments. It was proof that the same unapologetic personality that shocked the Emmys could also entertain a child watching Disney. One example of this paradox came in his podcast. Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast, which debuted in 2014. The show featured in-depth interviews with legendary entertainers and deep dives into obscure pop culture. But what truly made it work was Gilbert's encyclopedic knowledge of old Hollywood and his genuine love for forgotten performers. It gave fans a rare glimpse into a side of Gilbert they hadn't seen: thoughtful, reverent, and incredibly insightful. And yet, the comic's edge never dulled. Even in his podcast, the punchlines came sharp and fast. Gilbert's ability to move fluidly between vulgarity and sincerity became his signature. He reminded us that people are complicated, and that being offensive doesn't mean being malicious. Sadly, behind the laughter was a reality few knew about. Gilbert had been battling myotonic dystrophy type 2, a rare genetic disorder, for years. He kept it quiet, as was his nature. He didn't want pity. He wanted to work. And he did, up until his final days. In April 2022, just hours after recording an episode of his podcast with actress Brenda Vaccaro, Gilbert was rushed to the hospital with heart complications. He passed away on April 12, surrounded by his loved ones. His funeral, held in Valhalla, New York, was filled with laughter, because how could it not be? On his grave marker, the words "too soon" were etched, an unforgettable callback to his infamous 9/11 joke. It was a statement that captured Gilbert perfectly: provocative, funny, and eternally aware of irony. Even in death, Gilbert left us one last laugh. So what can we learn from a man like Gilbert Gottfried? It's easy to write him off as just another shock comic, but that would be a grave mistake. Behind every scream and every controversial joke was an artist who lived and breathed comedy. He understood the power of humor, not just to provoke, but to survive. Gilbert's life wasn't easy. He faced rejections, public outrage, and industry blacklisting. But he never let any of it stop him. He kept moving, kept laughing, kept creating. Because to him, the joke was worth it. His legacy reminds us that art doesn't have to be comfortable. It doesn't have to play by the rules. Sometimes, the most important voices are the ones that make us uncomfortable, the ones that challenge the boundaries we think are fixed. Gilbert Gottfried was that voice, and while he may be gone, his echo, his legacy reminds us that art doesn't have to be comfortable. It doesn't have to play by the rules. Sometimes, the most important voices are the ones that make us uncomfortable, the ones that challenge the boundaries we think are fixed. Gilbert Gottfried was that voice, and while he may be gone, his echo, the unmistakable, unforgettable sound of him laughing through the fire, will live on forever. If you were moved by this story, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, what's your favorite Gilbert Gottfried moment? Let's honor him not just with memory, but with laughter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.